On 4 now, a trip to the seaside with dispatchers.
On Dispatches tonight, the holidays that damage your health. In a week that's seen a new attack on the state of our beaches, Dispatches investigates the unreported danger to Britain's bathers, literally millions of viruses in the sea. Tonight, reporter Toby Moore joins forces with a small army of secret swimmers, analysing exactly what's in the seawater at a range of British resorts, and revealing for the first time a link between illness and the sea. That's Dispatches, paddling in murky waters.
Isn't life wonderful? Isn't it fun to be under the sun and the sky? When the barometer's high. Ain't the
Dear
world
all,
beautiful?
since the summer, Dispatches has been on the beach. We've been having a lovely time until we discovered what else was at the seaside besides the sea. Viruses, hundreds and thousands of them.
These viruses do cause diarrhoea, they do cause illness. And if these viruses are present, then it would suggest that other viruses which cause similar sort of illnesses may also be present.
We met those who'd seen it with their own eyes.
Stomach trouble, common skin rashes. We had small kids within minutes of going in the water come out in rashes.
And we met bathers whose seaside trip ended in tragedy.
Throughout the whole of the period I was in hospital, my legs were really weak, and they said that the virus would cause weakness to the joints and the muscles. And when I came out then the second time, they just got weaker and weaker until I couldn't stand on them anymore.
Isn't it fun to be under the sun?
Ah, Cornwall. Was that slick of raw sewage in the brochure, darling? And what was it that microbiologist said about the risks people face when they swim on government-approved beaches?
They could become ill if they bathe in those waters, even though they may carry the official seal of approval.
This man is stripping for action. He's part of an army of secret bathers who've spent the last year sampling the waters at some of Britain's most famous beach resorts. What they've uncovered is the hidden threat to our health from sewage in the sea. For years, the government and water authorities have been saying that if there is a problem, it's because of bacteria. They should have been telling us about viruses.
If you look at the diseases that people get when they go bathing or take part in water sports, they're not bacterial in origin. They're viral in origin. It's viruses that are causing these diseases. So we ought to be looking at the viruses, and that's what we intend to set up.
Inside these bottles of frozen seawater are the ingredients to explode the reassuring advice of the water companies and countless government committees. The team has found that viruses exist in seawater and remain infectious for months.
Bacteria are much larger than viruses, and viruses aren't really living. They're almost like very complex toxins, very complex molecules. And because of that, they survive for much longer. They're much hardier than bacteria. And things like sunlight, things like heat, things like the chemicals that are in the water tend not to destroy the viruses quite so much as they do the bacteria. So if we're going to look for something which is going to persist in these waters for a long time, it's going to be the viruses there, not the bacterium.
At water sport events up and down the country, Dr. Mint's team has been conducting the second part of the study. They're looking for evidence of a new type of virus, the astrovirus, in the blood of people who use the sea regularly. By comparing their blood with that of those who don't go in the sea, they believe they can demonstrate a link between bathing and exposure to harmful viruses.
I trust you, honestly.
The tests that we use basically just show whether someone has been exposed to a virus or not. And of course, a lot of these viruses people get exposed to in childhood. So we can't tell you whether they got exposed because they were surfing or because they got exposed to it when they were children. Now, with the new virus, of course, they didn't get exposed to it when they were a child. So if they have evidence of exposure to it now, so it suggests that it's the exposure to the water as they take part in their sport which has given them the infection in the first place.
The seawater results would give anybody planning a holiday in Britain this year pause for thought. Up to hundreds of thousands of viruses were found in a single litre of bathing water. Just 10 can make you ill. Neil Hendrickson and his 10-year-old son were certainly not looking for viruses when they went swimming last summer off Sandown Beach on the Isle of Wight. It was the first time they'd been into the sea since moving to their home nearby. A brief dip turned into an experience they would never forget.
The evening after the swim, I developed fairly severe diarrhoea, and then that turned into violent sickness during the night. Thomas, in the meantime, had developed a high temperature and was complaining of a sore throat. The following day, he went to the doctor with that, was prescribed some antibiotics, but that evening we began to get a little more concerned. His temperature had remained high, and the concern grew somewhat during the evening when he was hallucinating. He also went into convulsions then. At that point we called the doctor again.
I kept on having thoughts that kept on hearing voices like, so you tense your muscles really hard, and I'm like, have a little, and you speak to yourself, and I was thinking of things really, like spooky.
On arrival in hospital, he was put into an isolation ward. The doctors weren't too certain what was causing the problem. Thomas did mention tenderness in the neck, and over a couple of days a swelling developed until it grew to the size of half a tennis ball. It was actually extended out beyond his ear, so it's quite a size, quite frightening to see.
Thomas was diagnosed as having a severe viral infection with complications.
We went back in our minds over what we'd done as a family in the days leading up to that, and the only thing that was different between the four of us was the fact that Thomas and I had swum. The others hadn't. I was rather annoyed. There's no indication down on our little bit of beach that in fact that there is a sewage outfall not far from the shore. You take a calculated risk when you swim in the sea. I'd like to know just how heavily stacked the odds are against us.
Southern Water is responsible for sewage discharges around the Isle of Wight. All they would say was,
"We can find no record of this case."
But Dispatches has now uncovered dozens of similar incidents. Simon Farthing suffered a viral infection of the glands after surfing in the Tyne estuary last summer. At least 7 other fellow surfers fell ill on the same day. Simon and Martin Dent were hospitalised 4 years ago with near-fatal blood poisoning and kidney failure associated with the gastroenteritis virus. Doctors said it could have come after a day on Cleethorpes Beach. James Abbott contracted Stephen Johnson syndrome, a viral infection which causes ulcers and lesions on the body and in the mouth. Medical records show it may have come from surfing in the sea off South Devon last year. And there was James Andrews, who caught hepatitis A 4 years ago after windsurfing off Eastbourne. It attacked his liver and gave him stomach pains for 2 years. Proving such illnesses come from the sea has always been difficult, but James Andrews successfully won legal aid to sue Southern Water. For the first time, one of the country's top virologists and an advisor to the government was prepared to stand up in court and make the link between viral illness and the sea.
He had not been to countries where hepatitis A is common, nor had he been in contact knowingly with a person or group of people who themselves had hepatitis A. And the fact that at the right sort of point in time, he'd spent extensive periods swimming in and presumably accidentally consuming seawater in a coastal region where we know that there were the occasional cases of hepatitis A in the community, made it on balance of probabilities seem compatible with his having been infected through ingesting seawater, through swallowing seawater.
There is nothing illegal in what Southern Water were doing. If the government agency gives its consent, water companies can discharge as much raw sewage into our seas as they want. But there are other legal obligations.
There are a parallel set of common law duties, those duties in negligence and nuisance, which they also have to comply with. It's a bit like driving a motor car and saying, well, I've got a licence to drive that car. That's the equivalent of consent. Simply because you've got a licence to do something doesn't mean that you don't have to exercise reasonable care in performing that operation.
James Andrews dropped his action when he got a job and legal aid was withdrawn, but it still proved to be a breakthrough case.
The Legal Aid Board are now prepared to accept that on the face of it there is a prima facie case which the water companies have to answer. The board don't fund cases lightly. We instructed one of the country's leading experts in water law. In his view, and in the Legal Aid Board view, there was sufficient evidence to warrant taking proceedings against, in James's case, against Southern Water.
Southern Water said,
there is no evidence in the UK to associate hepatitis A with sea bathing, let alone windsurfing more than half a mile offshore.
do you think there are other James Andrews cases out there?
I'm sure there will be other people who have been swimming in fecally contaminated water, that's basically water with unprocessed sewage in it, who will have been infected, but it's a question of finding them and identifying, but beyond reasonable doubt, that their source of infection was swimming and not something else. That's the difficulty. I'm sure they're there, it's the finding of them.
The government claims our beaches are safe. Last year it trumpeted the results of research commissioned from the Water Research Centre, which, it said, was good news for bathers. But we spoke to two of the study's main scientists, who put a rather different gloss on it.
Well, the research itself is very extensive, but the report highlights a number of conclusions and highlights quite a large number of recommendations. And the government, when it responded to that report, came out with a very upbeat press release, which was just based on 2 or 3 of those conclusions. I think the key thing is that the public are being misled. They may be encouraged now to bathe in waters which could actually exert a considerable risk to their health.
Robert Atkins, the Minister for the Environment, said he was reassured by the WRC report. Are you?
Well, if you look at the WRC report in detail, what you find is that they clearly state that at beaches which have traditionally passed the European directive standards, we have identified significant risks of minor symptom disease transmission. So in those terms, I think it does require further attention.
It's the responsibility of the government to ensure our beaches meet certain European standards. At set points and at set times during the summer, it measures for evidence of water contamination. To do this, it tests for bacteria. But this is little more than a snapshot of what really goes on. Nowhere were the true absurdities of the current monitoring regime more graphically illustrated than on a private beach at Croyd in North Devon, which the government claimed passed all its tests with flying colours. This was the reality. Raw sewage piled up in rock pools. And all this easily accessible to holidaymakers as recently as last spring.
When I was looking at rock pools, looking at my beach covered in human excreta, I could not accept that those tests were a fair reflection of what was going on down here. So we instructed our own people to carry out tests.
And what were the results?
Horrifying. I mean, unbelievable. I mean, they were 2,000, in some cases, 2,000 times above the legal laid down limits.
In other words, your beaches failed the EC directive entirely?
At those particular moments in time, yes. And obviously it was a hazard to the general public.
What do you think then about the testing regime?
Well, I think under those circumstances, I've demonstrated that the whole thing's a nonsense.
South West Water reached an out-of-court settlement with Mike Saltmarsh and removed the sewage outlet. His beach is clean again. Dispatches asked South West Water to appear on the programme. They declined, so we sent them a postcard with our questions. They said they had now carried out several improvements to the sewerage system at Croyd Bay. If the bacteria tests seem inadequate, the testing for viruses is positively absurd. European law requires a beach to be virus-free, yet the government agency only occasionally tests for them. Dispatches has now established that even when those tests are done, the results are ignored. For example, at this beach in Blackpool. Last year, it was tested twice for viruses. On both occasions, viruses were present, yet it passed. We found 63 beaches with such results. And because most government-passed beaches are deemed to be largely free from bacterial pollution, they're not tested for viruses at all. Dispatches asked the Department of Environment to appear. They declined, so they too got a postcard. They told us that for a beach to pass, a bacteria test alone is
generally accepted by member states and endorsed by the European Commission.
But the Commission told us that this is not true and that the results of the virus test could not be ignored. This is Oxwich Bay in South Wales, currently holder of a Premier Seaside Award for the cleanliness of its water.
I went swimming in Oxwich Bay on the 7th of August. Early hours of the morning. It was a friend's leaving party. And we had a barbecue, and then we decided to go for a swim. I don't like actually standing on the bottom of the water, so I dived in. And someone at my nose. I was in there for about half an hour, and the water was really warm. So then I came out then, I was just starting feeling cold then from there.
What started as aching joints developed into a local paralysis, which left Cassandra immobile from the waist down.
It progressed over this time of 10 days. And that was when I was taken into Prince Philip Hospital then, which I don't remember of any of that. At high temperatures, rapid pulse, just really down. Then my legs, they just wouldn't move at all. My arms were weak as well, so they had to lift me everywhere.
Dispatches has now obtained Cassandra's hospital records, which show her illness was caused by a viral infection.
Has anyone given you any indication that she might have contracted this from the sea?
A couple of doctors did say that it was a possibility that what she'd got had come from the water. But that's as far as we got with it. They just didn't know.
Do you have any doubt in your mind where you contracted the virus?
I was fit up until I went into Oxwich Bay, and it started from there. So.
The riddle is that the nearest sewage works to Oxwich Bay does treat the effluent. If Cassandra contracted her virus in the bay, could it have come from a quite separate source? Dispatches took a boat trip to find out. We sailed across Swansea Bay towards the headland at Mumbles Point, where we found the Mumbles sewage outlet, the responsibility of Welsh Water. Most of Swansea's raw sewage comes out here, but could it have been carried to Oxwich Bay, less than 10 miles down the coast?
Sewage or any plume discharged off this point here could be picked up by the ebb tide and also by the anti-clockwise gyre or the eddy that does flow out along the Mumbles Head here. We know that water body moves around through the gap of the Mixon Shoal here, down across Portleen, across sensitive areas, and into the complex of Oxwich Bay. It is possible that Oxwich Bay, of course, has its own circulation pattern. The hydrographic conditions could take it offshore. By the same token, wind against tide could well push it into Oxwich itself.
So what were conditions like that night?
Well, we have a mostly dry and reasonably warm night with clear spells and gentle winds. Tides will be in around 7 o'clock in the morning. They're spring tides, and with a new moon, there'll be a fairly high rise and fall of tide. Temperature that tide close inshore as high as 19-20 Celsius.
According to Welsh Water's environmental consultants, these tidal conditions could have carried sewage from the Mumbles outlet into Oxwich Bay at the very time that Cassandra went swimming. Dispatches asked Welsh Water to appear. They declined, so they got a postcard. Welsh Water replied,
"Our modelling work indicates that it is highly unlikely that any of our discharges could be contributory to any problems at Oxwich."
They also said that they will start building full sewage treatment works at Swansea this year to be completed in 1997.
When do the doctors think that you'll make a recovery from this?
They say once my muscles start coming back now, they'll come back quite quick. It just takes time now.
What do you want to do when you recover? What?
Run.
Isn't life wonderful? Isn't it fun to be under the sun in the sky?
We'd come to the end of the first part of our holiday. Viruses, dirty beaches, bathers becoming ill. The second part of our holiday was to prove just as disturbing.
Looking so right that it's quite a delight to the eye.
Better get back now.
No!
Come down again tomorrow.
There is one man-made achievement, big enough to be visible from space. Something which illustrates what for hundreds of thousands of years has been the most basic instinct known to man. To protect. Norwich Union. No one protects more.
Pressure from blocked sinuses can cause pain and headaches. Take Sinutab. Its double action eases the pain and relieves congestion quickly. And Sinutab Nighttime is available to also aid restful sleep. Sinutab and Sinutab Nighttime relieve sinus pain and headache fast.
Citroën have discovered a gap in the market. An estate car that's almost as compact as the acclaimed ZX hatchback, but with an enormous load area of up to 55 cubic feet. Perfect for when you're expecting the patter of tiny feet. The Citroën ZX Estate, from £10,355. Discover what Citroën can do for you.
Star International Fashions have created a real dilemma for us men this Valentine's Day with their gift box sets of 100% pure silk designer lingerie. Which set to order for February the 14th? Gift set 1 with camisole, French knickers and briefs at $24.95? Or gift set 2 with briefs, suspender belt and matching stockings at only $19.95? Or both for the ultimate compliment in pure silk? And which colour? Ivory, Valentine red or midnight black? The size is easy, small, medium and medium plus. And ordering's easy too. Phone their friendly staff now on 0233 66 44 64 in time for Valentine's Day. The luxury of pure silk, probably the finest compliment a man can pay to a woman.
We're waiting for your call.
Buy selected great value $2.99 or $3.99 KFC combos, and you can upgrade your Pepsi Max and regular fries for just 30p.
$220 million gallons of sewage are pumped into the sea every day. Only 2% receive secondary treatment, which removes most, but not all, bacteria and viruses. But this is what the vast majority of it looks like. Raw sewage, which at best has had only some of the solids removed. This has consequences that go beyond the quality of our bathing water. Virus contamination was far from the minds of couples celebrating St. Valentine's Day last year in Norwich. Cupid had apparently taken the night off. Their romantic evening was about to give them a very rude insight into the state of Britain's shellfish industry. sewage is now forcing people out of business. Owing to new European regulations introduced 2 years ago, this mussel farm on the Torridge estuary in North Devon was closed down.
This stopped us from harvesting our mussels because the water was far too polluted.
And what's happened to your fishery?
Well, the fishery's completely been closed down.
And what's this done for your business?
I'm out of business now. I have no business.
How much money do you reckon you've lost then, since then?
Well, at least 40,000 a year. This is what we're plagued with. Bits of sanitary towel. And we get this washed down across our bed, so it's pretty obvious where it's coming from. Southwest Water's drains.
Brian Hill is now suing Southwest Water for loss of earnings. Southwest Water told dispatchers,
It must be remembered that there are other non-Southwest Water discharges into the Torridge estuary which affect water quality.
shellfish are subject to regulations which classify the quality of waters where they grow. Shellfish which fall into the bottom category, D, are considered unfit for human consumption. Shellfish from the top category, A, can be eaten uncooked straight from the sea. With the help of government data, Dispatches has discovered that Britain's shellfish beds are now so contaminated with sewage that 90% are dangerous to eat without special treatment. But even then, do they get rid of all the viruses?
Shellfish feed off the sewage. They actually almost eat the sewage, if you like. The sewage goes into their bodies, and things like bacteria and other parts of the water tend to come out again from their bodies. What happens with the viruses is that they tend not to come out of those bodies, and they are concentrated, several 10 to 100-fold. And unless you cook the shellfish properly, you are playing Russian roulette with getting a pretty nasty diarrheal and vomiting disease.
Back at the St. Valentine's Day dinner, the shellfish were the best. Grade A oysters.
As soon as I woke up, I felt really ill, vomiting and diarrhea for the next 24 hours, pains in the stomach, feeling very tired, lethargic for the rest of the week, actually.
The same again. I mean, I woke up at 2:30 in the morning, not the next day, but the following day, and with sickness, diarrhea, feeling very uncomfortable in the stomach, pains, cramps, and very tired for the rest of the week, even after the sickness had cleared up after about 48 hours.
In fact, 19 out of 52 guests went down with severe viral gastroenteritis. The oysters came from waters within the Anglian Water region. They told us,
There is no history or evidence to support any link whatsoever between the operations of Anglian Water and the incident in question.
Dispatches wanted to interview the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food, but they declined. However, one public health scientist was prepared to say something.
We know that each year there are a small number of outbreaks of gastroenteritis that are associated with the consumption of shellfish. But the numbers of this are small. It's quite clear that larger numbers of infections actually take place, and that because of the problems we have in identifying these infections, we underestimate the numbers. But exactly how large this risk is, I would be unable to speculate more precisely than that.
If you can't trust the best quality oysters you can get, I mean, can you trust any of them? I mean, are oysters safe to eat at all?
I shall personally never eat oysters ever again. They put me off for life.
Would you eat oysters from anywhere around Britain?
Personally, I don't like oysters. I wouldn't eat them from around Britain or other parts of the world.
Would you advise other people to eat them?
I think if people enjoy oysters, that they are at liberty to eat them. I think they should be aware that there is a small risk that they could contract viral gastroenteritis, and I think as long as they're aware of that, I think it's a choice that they can make.
Do you think people are aware enough of that at the moment?
I suspect they may not be. The general population may not be fully aware of that small risk.
is there an answer to this viral pollution? Dispatches travel to Jersey where they think they've found one. Ultraviolet technology which has been used in the United States for more than a decade. Now all the island sewage is treated with ultraviolet light before anything is allowed to pour into the sea.
We felt that the only sure way of knocking out bacteria, and particularly viruses, was with the UV plant. After the installation of the UV, we carried out tests of our own, and we sampled something like 47 sites in the island, and we found one virus, I think it was, in only one of these sites, and that was a sort of a closed water.
And this is how the island sewage, swollen annually by thousands of visitors, is treated.
An average sewage secondary effluent contains between 10,000 and 1 million bacteria and viruses. The UV lamp is surrounded by a quartz glass sleeve. The effluent has a contact time over the lamps of about 20 seconds. It flows over the lamp, and as the lamp is radiating energy, then the effluent absorbs that energy, or the bacteria and the viruses absorb the energy and are inactivated. The final effluent, which goes back to sea, is flowing from the UV plant down here, and it goes then through a culvert or tunnel down back into the sea.
Jersey plans a new campaign to lure visitors. Move over Bergerac, welcome virus-free water.
Very recently we carried out quite an extensive consumer research, and on top came the cleanliness of our seawater. So from that we know exactly that it's the aspect of the holiday which is of most interest to our target market.
Back on the mainland, something at last is stirring. As the community charge payers of Cornwall know only too well, some £100 million is being spent by South West Water on a huge scheme which will still offer only secondary treatment.
They're actually creating a massive infrastructure project for the whole of West Cornwall. It's a bit like the Jubilee line and the Heathrow Express line, only unfortunately what we're getting is the Brown line. It's sort of a massive metro for turds and sanitary ware.
No expense is being spared to give the contents of a lavatory flushed in St Ives the sort of epic journey you might expect from crossbreeding an ambitious transport scheme with a Disneyland ride.
It's delivered by gravity to this point down here, and then it's pumped by dual pumps 90 metres to the top of that hill on the other side of the bay there. From there it undertakes a subterranean journey across the downs and down towards Hale, where it's refined and reduced down to a brown straw-coloured liquid, which South West Water described as having the appearance of ginger beer. From there it's pumped across the town of Hale, round the back of the Towns, round the back of Gwithian village, and eventually delivered to a subterranean tunnel at Gwithian beach. From there it's pumped 1.5 kilometres out to sea, and eventually it's discharged just to the left of the Godrevy Lighthouse. I think it travels probably in the region of 15 kilometres total. I mean, it's a pretty phenomenal distance for a turd to have to travel.
Chris Massey and a team of engineers came up with a cheaper solution using small ultraviolet treatment plants. It was backed by the council and approved by a major engineering conglomerate. It would have saved more than £18 million. It was back to South West Water with another postcard. They said their scheme was found to be
the most beneficial in terms of financial, environmental and operational criteria, and could be built and run at the lowest total cost.
They also said it
meets all the requirements of the discharge consent granted by Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Pollution.
At the end of the day, though, you're going to have a spanking new system for dealing with the sewage of Cornwall, and that's the end of the problem.
Well, in metro terms, it is pretty much state-of-the-art, because the pumping stations and the underground pipelines and the delivery tubes are all pretty well fantastic feats of engineering. But at the end of the day, that effluent hasn't been fully treated. It's only been given primary and partial secondary treatment. Therefore, it contains millions of viruses, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of coliforms and bacteria. When the sea gets rough here and the winds are on shore, those viruses and those germs will be air-laden and they'll be arriving back on the beaches and back on the people inland.
Under current regulations, water companies don't have to give even secondary treatment if a coastline can get classified as a High Natural Dispersion Area, or HNDA. The government has identified 58 such areas where, it says, nature can be left to deal with the sewage. One rather surprising HNDA is Scarborough.
The tests that were carried out by, as it was then, the Yorkshire Water Authority's consultants indicated that materials discharged from the end of the pipe, the discharge point, would in fact arrive back in Scarborough, certainly North Bay, and indeed further afield within 3 days. And going miles and miles down the coast, right down to Filey Bay within, I think, 30-odd days.
This would appear to make a nonsense of it.
Funny you should say that. Yes, it doesn't actually disperse materials out to sea as such. It disperses them, but it just disperses them further along the coast.
By declaring an area an HNDA, the government enables water companies to postpone building secondary treatment works until the 21st century. But first, it has to find data to show that the environment will not be adversely affected by sewage discharge.
For instance, at a place, for instance, like Croyd, the computer model and the spring tide real data suggest a northward movement of water.
Which would send it away?
Which would send it away from the beach.
But what do you think would happen?
Well, in reality, the overall movement of waters, including spring and neap tides, is in fact south, onto the beach.
Why do you think the government is allowing HNDAs to be classified?
Well, this is, of course, just a personal opinion, but one has to wonder whether or not it may be to provide a facility for delaying tactics.
Isn't love marvelous, beautiful, wonderful? We must confess that the answer is yes, 'cause we found.
It's nearly winter, and Dr. Mint's study into viruses is almost complete. For 14 months, his team have been visiting Britain's beach resorts in search of the astrovirus. Back in the lab, the last few seawater samples are analysed. The results are now ready.
We found quite high levels of virus in almost all the beaches, and some were significantly worse than others.
Which were the worst?
Well, the worst was, unfortunately, the mecca for water sports enthusiasts, which was Murky, which had much higher levels than most of the other resorts, but the levels were quite high in almost all the southern resorts.
Among the beaches visited, Dr. Mint's study reveals that Scarborough had up to 10 astroviruses per litre of seawater. Skegness also had 10, Southend 100, Blackpool 1,000, and for Southampton it was 10,000 astroviruses per litre. But it was Newquay that was by far the worst, with readings of up to 100,000 astroviruses per litre of seawater.
This poses a very high infectious risk, of course. We don't know the precise number of viruses you need to cause diarrheal illness in someone, but certainly it orders of about 10 or 100 viruses is all that's required.
But that's extraordinary. You're finding tens of thousands of viruses, and it takes a handful to make you sick.
Indeed, that emphasises the infectious risk that is posed by this sewage contaminated water.
So what does Newquay make of Dr. Mint's study as the famous seaside resort prepares for another summer season?
The sea is used 365 days a year by surfers and other sea users. There is not a queue at the hospitals with viral infections. There may have been the odd one or two, considering that the surfers are in the water for possibly up to 2 or 3 hours at a time. Our bodies are not designed to stay in water that long. That's why they have to wear wetsuits. There has been the odd occasion of perhaps ear infection where the inside of the ear closes over because the water is so cold, and it does trap some seawater in, which eventually will go septic.
The fact is, if people have, say, stomach aches and they come down perhaps for a holiday, they're not immediately necessarily going to go to the doctor or report to a hospital. They're going to go home with it. So how do you know?
All right, then let's put it another way. If people come on holiday and they have a tummy upset, what is the proof that they have actually caught it in the sea? All we have at the moment is this professor who says there are a lot of viruses in the sea. It may be true, but at the moment I can't see any honest proof of the fact that he is correct.
So, is there evidence of a link between sewage discharges and viral infection? As the final blood samples are analysed, the team can reveal for the first time that there is such a link.
What we have found is that with a particular virus, astrovirus serotype 4, type of virus that causes diarrhoea, that the water sports enthusiasts are almost double, have almost double the risk of having been exposed to this in the past. These are illnesses which are not trivial to the person who actually suffers them. You know, it is a great inconvenience. It will have long-term consequences in terms of their jobs. And also, because of this second aspect, it will have economic consequences for the country as a whole.
Isn't life wonderful?
The Stevenage study is important because it will strengthen greatly the epidemiological evidence available, the elevated risk of surface contracting viral infections. It will go a long way to strengthening those cases.
I think the water companies are paid a fair due by society to handle sewage and its safe removal. Yes, I think they should, where their practices can be shown deficient, then I think, yes, the full weight of law should be brought to bear on them. If that means paying recompense to injured parties, then so be it.
I think possibly over the years people haven't realised what they've been doing to the water, and there is so much muck going in all around the coastline that if something isn't done soon, the next generation or the next one is going to be really bad, and I think they're going to have problems they're not going to be able to contain. That something needs to be done quick.
But for those of you planning a holiday in Britain this year, I have one last piece of disturbing information before I sign off. Many viruses are where you least expect them.
Did you find any correlation between what you discovered on levels of virus and what is published about levels of bacteria?
That's one of the unfortunate things I think that we have found, that the levels of virus correlate very poorly with the levels of bacteria. So the standards that we currently use in routine practice just don't tell us whether there is a risk from these viruses or not.
Life's so wonderfully sweet that we can't keep our feet on the ground.
For a free fact sheet to accompany this programme, send a stamped addressed envelope to Beechers, Dispatchers, P.O. Box 4000, London W3 6XJ. And Dispatchers returns to Channel 4 in 2 weeks' time.